to order at 6:01 p.m. And Don, if you could call the roll.
I will. Luke Murray.
Here.
Lito Hall.
Here.
Amy Angeloni.
Here.
Ann Dixon.
Here.
Dave Agostino. Christine Kennedy.
Here.
And Shirley Shockley.
Here.
Don Howard is here. Rob Levesque. Craig is out. Joe Lucian.
Here.
Harold Sands. Here. Jason Martin is not here. Kathy Pavlik.
Here.
John Price. And Lee Restall.
Here. Thanks everybody for attending on these many busy days. I know we had team meetings last night, so approval of the minutes. We actually don't have any, so we're off the hook on that one. I'll give the chairman's report and then we can break for pizza, and then because I don't have a very long report. So the teams are going to discuss kind of updates tonight, so I won't get too far into that. I'll just acknowledge that the teams have been working hard. The leadership's been working hard. You'll get some updates tonight. I think it's reflected in the amount of effort that's been put on kind of behind the scenes, but many of you are involved. So I just want to express my appreciation to them, really carrying the ball and moving this forward. It's extremely important that we have that team effort, and other people carry weight, and I think that's happening. So Craig and I are working on the extension. We have to have a formal, and I don't know if Craig reached out to you at all, Kathy, on a meeting, but we have to have a formal meeting with the school committee to discuss why we would have the extension. And then we submit the formal request. So it's a 20-day period. We're tracking it. We're a little behind. It's fine. We talked to Mario. It's just in the mix of everything else, we just don't want to lose track of it. So we feel confident on the extension. It's just the formalities of the process we have to go through. So I just want you to know that's being tracked and worked on. We have a review of OPM, so I won't get too far into that. And we can provide an update, Harold. Also, some of you know, some of you don't, but Rob has indicated he can't no longer serve on the building committee. And as we know, he hasn't been showing up. And it's really his work priorities and schedule have changed. He's been very supportive of the effort. He just can't do it. Doesn't feel he has the capacity to attend the meetings. So I'll pitch this to Don. If we are going to have to replace him on the committee, and hopefully that can be done soon with an appointment by the town council. So we'll have to get applications in and get a selection done so we can have a replacement on the building committee moving forward, because we still have a lot of work to do. If indeed the project continues to move forward, the building committee could last another 3 years. I know you all love to hear that, but it's going to change in role. It would change to a more physical boots on the ground update on the progress role, post ballot, post construction. So nevertheless, we want to have a full committee, so we'll work on doing that. So I'll put that on Don's task list, so him and I can kind of coordinate that.
So just one point of order, on next Monday, I am advertising or talking about openings on boards and commissions.
Okay.
So if I get it on the agenda by tomorrow, so we're looking for a member for the school building committee.
Correct.
Any particular?
It's a member of the electorate, so and ideally they would have, maybe we can go back, Don, and look at what our original criteria was.
Don't we already have people who have jumped onto subcommittees? Maybe we should
we do.
make sure know that we're looking at nothing else.
And that would be something that the team leaders, Don, Amy, Harold, could maybe push out that we have a vacancy to be able to fill, and that's a good idea.
Are there any like alternates from the original process? Because you interviewed people also, right?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer.
Just enough people applying.
Did we actually, because I can't remember how that process went. It's been a couple of years. Did the council
We
solicit
were just looking at
directly?
I don't know, but I'm going to send a note to get somebody.
Okay, all right. So we'll figure that out. If there's anybody lingering, we can reach out to, fine. It was, the council appoints the building committee. So what we had done is we negotiated early on how the makeup was going to happen, and then the council really kind of took the lead on appointing the committee. So it'll get kicked back to council to appoint that other member. Along with that, some housekeeping. We lost, we'll have to figure this out too, because Mrs. A moved up in her position. We lost a principal effectively. So,
I did talk to Brooke, she said she would do it.
so that's the other appointment we need to make is a replacement on the principal position or administrative position.
We have to.
But that's not, is that a town council appointment?
It is a town council appointment. because
I'll
it was
check with
originally-
Brooke just to verify.
So that would be, it would be good housekeeping to get it done at the same time when we go to make the appointment for the
Well,
new.
do we need a new member
Yeah,
then?
then,
If
because
Mrs.
Amy's
A
taking-
shifts over to a general member and we add a
So-
principal?
Originally, Don served as the curriculum coordinator administrator position. Then he moved up in the superintendent role, assistant superintendent role, so things have shifted. So I actually have to go through and rectify where we were versus where we're at now. Because it was internal changes that just kind of bumped positions. So I just want to make sure that we fall in line with our original intended committee, and we're filling any vacancies. So I don't think there's not necessarily a limitation, there's a minimum requirement by RIDE, and there's prescribed under ordinance the makeup of the building, a building committee. But we had to rectify that because I think RIDE requires, I forget what I had to do a whole Excel spreadsheet to figure this out because RIDE's requirements didn't align with our ordinance on a building committee. So I say that to say I need to do more work, but we're gonna get that process done. I just want to make everyone aware of it. And we'll coordinate. On the 27th, we have an update meeting to council. It's primarily just a presentation that I'll lead on the financial aspects of the project, some questions that council members have posed that I want to make sure are addressed. Hopefully you've had a chance to tune into the meeting, is it last week, financial health?
Yeah, I think so. 14, maybe?
Yeah. It was an interesting meeting. I think it was well done. Kind of gave us a status report on where the town sits as a whole. I don't, others are welcome to chime in. I felt like felt like a lot of it we kind of knew. Pension liability, OPEB, and a lot of the things kind of dragging the town down financially are still there, unfortunately. But I don't know how directly tied they are to this project, except for the fact that a very good point was made on decision-making moving forward. Like, there was a final slide that I think I'm going to address in our presentation moving forward is, questions that the council should really ask when considering future projects. So it's something that I take to heart, and I think we do need to address because it's a fair concern. Where does the larger financial viability of the town or health of the town sit? So the 27th, if you can attend, or attend virtually, you're still doing Zoom?
Oh, yes.
So it would be great if you could come in person, but if not, at least, tune in and watch. That is an update. Council President Dixon and I have discussed having another update the end of October, and then moving toward a vote in mid-November, depending on the timelines, before Thanksgiving to have the vote whether we move forward or not. The intent on this is to kind of slow feed this, allow plenty of time to receive questions, come back with an update, still have time for questions. By the time the vote happens, I would envision that we've pretty much vetted this out. I expect, my hope is by the time this goes to vote, it's not really a lot of questions, it's a matter of decision-making time, up or down vote. So by kind of slow feeding this over the next couple of months, I think it gives ample time for the council to consider, ask questions of the town manager, because there's also the other side of the equation, and allows us ample time to respond to questions. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with that? Okay. That's it for my chairman's report. I'll recess at 6:11 until 6. How long do people meet? Grab their pizza, 10 minutes? So I'll say 6, we'll go 6:22 to restart. So we're recessed. I'm getting an extra minute. Our next items on the agenda is project schedule review. And I'll put a lead on the spot, and really, because we haven't connected
At all.
at all, but we need to. So I put this on, I guess I'll briefly speak to it, is that we need to update the schedule. Now that we have some clarity on the process moving forward, and weave in any adjustments. So Phil, you had created a little bit of adjustment schedule. Can you speak to that on the construction side? I know you gave some of the finance. Did you adjust the schedule itself?
Not since the last time I gave it to finance.
Okay.
So, and I think Harold will speak to this, the most important thing in terms of the schedule will be making sure you maintain the dates that keep you eligible for the incentives.
Right.
That would be.
So that'll balance.
And then, of course, finish it within the allotted time.
How concerned should we be about that in our current market where getting materials is so hard and everyone's doing construction?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the market's gonna bear out. I mean, by the time we actually do boots on the ground construction, it could be another year, right? So hopefully supply chain reestablishes, but we don't know.
Do either of you have any better idea?
I mean, from a cost standpoint, I mean, we're definitely gonna be impacted by what's going on with material prices. And some things where, I think a lot of things that have gone up drastically are never gonna go back down to where they were. They're going down a little and kind of
They've found where
leveling
people
out.
will pay.
Yeah, they're gonna go down a little and level out, but they're probably gonna be more than what we anticipated, early on. So again, we'll work through that. We're early enough that we can manage through that process. There are some people who are already like in the process of being in the ground in 6 months, that will have bigger issues. We had about a year, so I think we'll be okay. And then, as far as manpower is an issue. A lot of people still haven't gone back to work, but again, a lot of schools finished in September. So we'll just get back on the train where in theory, guys are
Gotcha.
freeing up.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to. roll
Sorry,
back.
when you said schools finished in September, I'm like shut down.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, we're in a COVID world where
And August is horrible if you work in construction
Yeah.
and you're working on a school. Like, I don't think we. Slap.
I like that.
I mean, I'm really worried about the price of steel. I mean, can you buy in anticipation of what your needs are or not?
You could probably buy raw material, but again, where do you put these lengths of steel? Like, there's not really, and without having a real idea of how you're gonna have the regular structural members be pretty
Right.
typical, but a lot of the small, there's gonna be stuff that you can't really buy until you're designed, and a lot of the, sadly, I don't know, Phil, if you've seen different, there's a lot of like delegated design too, so the structural engineer will take it but so far, but then you need to bid, award, get a contractor on board, and then you can fully, determine what you're really gonna have for steel, so it's kind of a risk to say, let me just buy a whole bunch of steel up front.
But, keep in mind, we had some float built into the overall budget. It's not uncommon to value engineer these things down. We had, I think ultimately we have, and I believe in, we've had this discussion. I think we have a healthy enough budget that if need be, we can value engineer it down without sacrificing substantial amounts of the project. So, but at this point, just to reel it back in, we're really concerned about schedule just in terms of the finance plan, council's questions, our own sort of short-term time frame for both council approvals, the ballot, because none of this happens unless we get a successful ballot measure. So not because I don't love the long-term conversation that doesn't feel good, but I want to make sure that we really map out the short-term really well, which we have a good foothold on, Alita. I think you had created a Gantt chart based on the next several months. I think we just need to tighten that up. And then weaving in an overall schedule, which Mrs. A will go through a little bit tonight on some of the logistics planning, and that'll be a separate breakout schedule. And I believe you created your own sub-schedule on that stuff, which we'll go through. So the bottom line is we need to connect. I think we all need to connect. I think we kind of know financially what needs to happen. June 15th of 2025 is kind of the hit date.
Yep.
Financially, just because of the way the financing works. Do you want to speak to that just really briefly?
June 15th, 2025 is sort of the cutoff date for finalizing it because if you don't finish by that point in time, there's no housing aid that comes in September 15th. You actually have to wait a whole another year before you can get any housing aid coming in. And that is the bulk of what's financing the bond going forward. So we would have to cover that amount during that period if we didn't finish at that point. So that's why it's a timing issue.
So it's a bit of a cash flow issue. I mean, it's not insurmountable, I guess, if we hit that point. We didn't. But for financial planning at this point, I really want to kind of hold June 15th of 2025 as the mark. Because you'd rather not extend that.
It's easy, it's easy.
We'll just hire, I mean, as a project manager, she says it's easy, we're all good.
Well, that date is so far out considering, don't we have to be in the ground for December 22?
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah, so that,
So-
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not especially concerned.
I like this. That's insane.
The schedules that we sign on for.
Well, then you're coming to the council meeting and I'll let you guys speak to that because, it's really, I think that's going to be a concern, right? And it's something that we need to alleviate that concern of saying, based on the pragmatics of construction and what you do, it shouldn't be an issue. So,
I mean, I put together like a little table by square foot, like right now, we're looking at a building at 167,000 square feet. I think we put a 20-month schedule to it. So, and it just kind of gradually goes up incrementally by there, but like 190,000 was up to like 23 or 24, like, so you know what I mean? That's kind of the range of what you're looking
Okay.
at. So we look at it square foot in duration.
so maybe that's something that we can discuss too, to adjust the overall schedule.
Yeah, just so to give you, some.
I mean, we can build in some, we'll build in some conservative flow into it.
What were
Well, I'm
we
sorry.
all in on the addition portion at the middle school? What was it, something like
Square footage or,
square footage on the new?
Should know this.
yeah, I should know this.
We'll get it to you.
I'll look on here.
So
real
you're
quick.
talking about the 2 levels that you're building on?
The three
story.
Three
But
story.
So
But then we have
Yeah.
renovation and then we
Yeah,
have.
but
Yeah, you've got the cafeteria at the front.
Ours is complex.
One of the things, and I just want to mention this, when we talk about the schedule part, and the summer slammer projects could be deferred, because the only thing that's really driving your big incentive is getting the middle school in the ground before the end of 2022. What I think you might want to talk about in terms of schedule is to what extent you may have some flexibility in that. For example, the cafeteria component, that's part of this project. That is probably something that could conceivably be done in that a period of time. We can talk more about this, but I think we may have to think about some options there. But
Sure.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit?
Sure.
Because along that same line, as you were talking, Phil, I was thinking about our plan for keeping kids in the school while we're constructing the school. And so if there are things that can happen over the summer that allow us to free up space to keep kids actively in that building, without having to worry about who's being displaced when and where, I think that's beneficial to kind of map that out as well.
I think you're right, but I could tell you it won't be in the summer of 2022
Okay.
that you're doing anything. And I'm thinking that's why the cafeteria piece is got to be the target.
Right.
And then that 4 classroom addition next to the gym is the next target. To Don's point, you're not going to be able to get into the back until that is done and the cafeteria is done, because you will want to demolish
Yeah.
that. So
And even partitioning out the auditorium for classroom space.
Yeah,
we-
so,
as part of the swing space plan, so there's options there. I think it also ties into pay-go.
Right.
Because we could pay-go some of that up front So that's stuff that we can work out on the schedule and kind of figure out. But again, probably a little more advanced than we need right now. Not that it's not important, it's great that you're thinking about it, but for right now, I think we need the short-term schedule, which is, keeping in mind, we don't get anything until we get to a ballot measure and we get approved. So we do need to map it, but, I just don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. We can lay out the options and we'll get an OPM on board. The OPM is really going to help us with that.
And I think we'll leave it, that's what we have it laid out right now. I think the intent was we were detailing everything that leads up to the vote, and then we kind of have general summary bars for design and construction, so it'll kind of still look that way, and then when we get beyond that, we'll draw out design and leave summary bars for construction and, yada, yada.
Okay.
So we'll definitely-
Perfect. So we have action item for this week is at least schedule a meeting so we can zoom out or whatever and get that finalized. So by the next meeting, the plan is to have a finalized schedule. Perfect. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right, we'll move on. Review of OPM procurement and work-related tasks. I'll start and then give an update. So we had a discussion about the OPM. We don't necessarily have to go out to RFP on this. State actually specifically exempts OPMs, architects, engineers, attorneys from bid process. Because the initial OPM is so short and the timeline is so short, and we really need to get somebody on board. I talked to Harold about just getting somebody in the short term to address things like drafting an architectural RFP, looking at the schedule, starting the projections, working on the ballot measure should we get there, until March only. After March, should we be successful, we put out a full RFP for OPM services. It's a much larger contract. We're kind of, we're going to be embedded with this person for a lot longer term. But I think in the short term, we've kind of dragged this out for a while. Luckily, Ride's been very gracious in not and kind of waiving their requirement, but it's time that we get an OPM. So, Harold, can you give an update on that?
Yes, so we talked to Peregrine Group, Sam Bradner specifically, and he gave us a contract. We feel it's a little bit high, so what we're going to go back to Sam about is this go on an hourly rate, which is also on the MPA list. So those rates are set in stone, and that's where I think we're probably going to end up with Peregrine Group and Sam Bradner.
What was his lump sum?
His lump sum was $6,000 a month, and our feeling is that that may be a little bit high for right now until March comes around, because I think there's specific tasks that we could get done. But he did give us a full contract up until March.
So Sam actually came to our update meeting with council and like the full dog and pony show we had a couple weeks ago. He's working on East Providence School. He worked on Barrington's middle school. So he's got a lot of project knowledge, especially with regards to the middle school, having done Barrington. He's got all their numbers. I actually did talk to him about doing a walkthrough of Barrington Middle School with some council members, some committee members, and answering specific questions related to the cost, because he iterated to me about how they had the value engineer down, and their original cost was higher, and they kind of had to cut the project down. And that one I think was around 70 million, but didn't have some of the square footage that we have. So I think I felt comfortable. I'd like him to maybe come and talk to the group, but we are looking to get somebody on board.
How many
So
kids do you know? Do you have any idea how many kids go to Barrington Middle School?
I don't know the answer to that question, but that would be some of the information that we'd be looking to talk to Sam about. So, question, do any of you have questions on that or concerns, or really, we have money in a budget conceivably. We have some fund balance we're kind of scraping to pay for this in the short term, but we really need to secure additional funding for the next phase. So by
Correct.
going hourly, we've done a lot of work on our own. I tended to agree that we may not need $6,000 a month worth of work. I think we can keep his time limited use him for the RFP work, the schedule work, being at some of the council meetings to answer questions on maybe projects he's been involved with, much like you have done. Thankfully, we have a couple of members of our building committee that are in the construction industry, but it helps to have that other party who's kind of the person who's dealt with multiple schools and being that independent sort of party to answer some of these questions. So where are we in that process?
Right now, he's just waiting for us to respond back to him on how we want to go.
So if we were to, so I wanted to bring it,
We have like 12.
huh?
How many kids are in our middle?
1,200.
So some of our costs are square footage, like we gotta fit these kids in school.
Yeah, and the nature of the building, like they don't, I think did they have an auditorium? I don't know if they had an auditorium. It's a different project, but he can kind of identify, he knows our project, he's been tracking our project. So I think he can identify the disparities and where we fit in. You know, you can't apply, I think, linear one project to another, but it tells you that there's been some suggestion like, oh, it's really high, it should be 40 million, because, you know, where that number comes from is unfounded. So having somebody like that who has industry experience, like, no, this is the average square foot cost of a facility like this, average it out, I think he'll lend credibility to, in addition to the third-party estimate we've already gotten, and Phil's estimate of saying, you know, there's validity, we're in the ballpark where we need to go. So,
In those 70 million, I feel like they finished Barrington like 2 years ago. So they probably
They did.
started it 2 years before that. So, you know, those dollars, unfortunately, have already, those would be higher if that number we're looking at.
So we'll work on getting Sam retained.
Right.
I'd like him to attend the next building committee meeting, so I'll commit to getting him here, as long as we can get that struck. Get the ball rolling. Architectural RFP is gonna be one big task on his list. He's done them before. He kind of has templates. He can help guide the committee through that. We need to get set up because we really need to retain an architect prior to a ballot vote. So that's gonna be a priority task come, and that should be on our schedule, which it was. We're just gonna push it up. But by March, we should have an architect retained. No offense to you, Phil,
I understand.
for the full project.
Yeah.
However that may allow himself. And we'll also have to pick our approach to how we do construction based on the schedule outline, because it may have to be a little bit more flexible on some pieces of the project. So anything else on the OPM? All right, so we'll, action items on there, we'll work on the contract, and we're going to come back next meeting, hopefully with an OPM, to start that discussion. Team updates. So I'll start with the finance team. Harold, you can give an update on. what you-
Okay, last night we had, a very informative meeting last night. Luke was there, Sarah Mandarelli, who's also a part of the team, and Ben Marshall was there as well. We went through all the numbers, we went through the final product. I know that Luke wants to, so do you want me to go through the numbers? Do you want me to go through the whole thing? It's.
I didn't want to have a full presentation because it's, you know, they spent hour and a half last
Well,
night, you know.
Correct.
No, let's do the high level.
Okay, so from a high level point, we really went over the savings, that if we went from 57.8% down to 43, the town would be losing about $22 million. So that's the big sale, is that you lose $22 million if you didn't do the 57.8%. Then we went through the timeline, which the big thing on the timeline was December 31st, 2022. There had to be shovels in the ground for 2 incentives, and the 2 incentives were education and health and safety. And then December 31st of 23, there was one more, which is utilization. And then the final one, which was 2025, June of 2025. which was the finishing of it. One of the great things that, with the help of the town, we were able to figure out that with the bond costs, basically what we're looking at is the debt service reduction over the next 14 years really sort of gives us an opportunity to decrease the amount of the tax levy from about 3.46 down to about one. We're going to be looking at 1.99 because we don't want any negative costs to total up at the end. Right now, I did the presentation last night at 1.73% tax levy, and we had 2 years, 24 and 25, that were negative numbers. We were underwater. So that's why we're increasing it to 1.99, and I haven't done that yet. We'll do that later.
And just if I interject, just so that to clarify for those who weren't on the finance team, essentially there's bonds falling off next year and the year after, debt payments we're already making on previous school bonds. So we're paying the juice on those. That debt falls off. So just like a credit card, you can now reallocate that payment over to new debt. What we're saying is because those were school-related bonds, we feel that it's appropriate that we reallocate those payments onto the new debt. And it's substantial. It's 1.5 million?
Yes.
1.5 million. So it essentially cuts us in half, more than half.
Your cost is 2.56.
Right. So now all we have to make up is the delta. That delta comes from a tax levy. We were originally talking 3.45% because we were looking conservatively initially, not having debt fall off considered. There was a chunk of money we had to raise. Now we're only having to raise a portion of that if that payment gets reapplied. So that now gets us down. It was run at 1.73. We had a discussion last night.
Right.
And what the concern on the town side that was kind of iterated is this may hamper our ability to fund future improvements, other things, roadways, whatnot. So by doing 1.99, we take the 22-23 fall off for ourselves, but this other debt falling off over the next 12 years. So as those debt cliffs happen, there's still funding in the budget because it's funded through tax rate, right? That money's there, that they can reapply those debt sums to other debt if they wanted to. So if they want to do a roadway project, and let's say they have a debt shelf that generates $800,000 in payments, they could feasibly go out to a $10 million bond and have that covered without increasing the levy. Does that make sense? So that essentially doesn't hamper the town. It hampers the town probably for the first 2 years if you don't want to raise a levy to fund new debt.
I do have a question because you talked about the school-related bonds, that the debt is falling off. Those school-related bonds, who is paying for the principal and interest for those bonds? Is it the town paying or is it coming out of the school budget?
The town pays all debt, always.
Okay,
So it doesn't matter if it's school-related or town-related, towns always pay debt. So it's coming out of the town's budget, and you're getting housing aid fixed to that. So that 1.5 is only our portion of a payment that's much larger prospectively. I didn't get into the financials.
No, we didn't.
But there's typically housing aid that's paid from the state, and our share is 1.5 million. So you don't have to take that and reallocate it to school debt. You can give it back to the taxpayers and lower the tax rate. You could reallocate it to a roadway project. The position I've kind of taken is it's logical that since that debt was taken for the schools and people voted for that bond, knowing there would be a levy increase to cover that debt, that it's appropriate to reallocate that debt payment to other school-related debt. That's the argument. Now, if it wasn't that way, let's say it was for trash trucks or other things, it might be a different argument because the voters thought they were buying trash trucks. And when those trash trucks were done, they expected maybe that either that money would be refunded or put back into other municipal services. And that's what I'm saying moving forward is beyond 23-24, that additional debt shelves was all municipal related debt. So if you reallocate those payments to other municipal bonds, then that makes sense without having to increase the tax levy. Everyone get that? Did I explain that clear enough? Okay, it gets a little complicated, but I think that's the gist.
I think the hard part, communications wise, is it's also got a very good counter argument. You know, like the argument we should just take this debt and put it back into the schools is really good. But the argument from, say, a resident who's like, wait, you could lower my taxes? You know what I'm saying? So the counter argument's hard on them.
So I think that, and then the pushback there is,
What are
you're
you?
correct. Like, you have to be,
Are you gonna lower my taxes? No.
No, it never happened.
well,
It doesn't happen, so I think what we need to do to counter that is to say, look, it's either school bonds or it's getting reallocated to something else. Because I mean, we can all be honest here and say, there's no way, based off of even the presentation, that they're gonna lower our taxes.
Right, it's getting allocated
It's
somewhere.
going somewhere.
But
Right.
could it pay down something? Could it like
But if
do
I
something
take
with the
myself
OPEB?
out of a school building committee member and I think of myself as just a mom taxpayer in the state, well, in this town, my question is gonna be, well, if I don't say yes to the school, what are we using that money for? And then I'm gonna say, okay, then I'm definitely saying yes to the school.
it'll probably go to the general fund where it'll get pushed down the tax rate for a certain year because it becomes a political issue, right? We don't want to tax the people too much. So we'll reallocate that to services. The unfortunate reality is then you lose that capital money.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, as far as I'm concerned, it's a terrible idea.
Right.
But we did see in that meeting the other night, we've got a lot of debt outside of bonds, and there are multiple places. I mean, so many places for this money to go.
Do these numbers factor in what is the dollar value that we have to pay toward or put away that we haven't been as far as maintenance for the schools? Is that in here and taken into account, or is that somewhere else where that also goes live?
So why don't you continue, because that's part of our.
Sorry, I'm letting them cheat
Look
off
at it,
me.
yeah,
I'm
okay.
giving them my notes.
So if you go over to the next slides, a couple slides there, basically, we go over the maintenance requirements. Keep going one more. And if you look at the orange right there, see the school, the maintenance requirement after this year is gonna be 3%. The school, through its tradespeople, is paying about $1 million, and we increase it by 2% every year, going forward. So the delta between the amount that's going to be the estimated maintenance requirement, if you look at 2023, the delta is what the maintenance funding gap is, which is 1.282 or 1.2 million. So somehow we're going to have to make up that delta if we don't do the bond. And the question is, how do we do that? And it's been a big question for the town for many years, and especially as it gets up to 3%, how do we do this? And it's going to have to come from somewhere, from a tax levy, something like that, because right now the school needs to continue operations as well as continue with the tradespeople, but we're not sure how we're going to close that gap. So with the bond, what you're doing is you're literally just taking away that maintenance funding gap. But the problem is, and this was brought up later, was that you still have to have a capital account going forward. And the question is, this is a break, but we still have to start looking at that. And that was the big thing that came out of that conversation is, yes, you get the bond, but 14 years from now, things start going downhill again with some of the other buildings that we're not putting a lot of money into. So how are we gonna do that? True, the state is not gonna be going after the 3%, but at the same time, we have to look after the Coventry schools.
So when I discussed this with Mario, my case from the SBA, my case was we should be able to count that interest towards a maintenance requirement because we're effectively taking multiple years of improvements, right? Our other option is we put money into this fund and we chip away at stuff. We patch holes, we put Band-Aids for the next 25 years. Instead of doing that, we're really taking a good chunk and doing it up front. So it makes sense that we could then allocate that interest. We're still holding over $1 million in trades and other activities. We're still maintaining buildings, right? The state's requirement is 3%. Whether that's adequate or inadequate is irrespective. They came up with a number, that's what they came up with. So this, if you go back to our previous conversation, right, you have a debt fall of 1.5 million. If they don't fund this project and they just say, all right, we have debt fallout, great, we have 1.5 million, but we still need to fund 1.2 million into the school budget to ramp up the maintenance. Even if the school committee says, all right, we'll take whatever you give us and we'll stuff it in that fund. I can tell you right now from the school committee side, we don't have money in our budget right now to just grab and stuff into maintenance, right? Because of the 0% that happened a couple of years ago, we were fighting for sports, all that good stuff. So logically, if you have a savings of 1.5, but you're having to put 1.2, 1.3, you still get nothing. And then what? Like, so now we're going to chip away, we'll put Band-Aids on the buildings out of that 3%. So it starts making logical sense of, all right, we get to count the interest, you do all it up front, we get $22 million in savings from the state, you start rolling all this in, it starts making a pretty good case to do this now. So that's sort of the case that we're going to build.
I mean, Mario said, I think it was Mario, essentially said at the meeting, we can't afford not to do the bond because not doing it means we have to come up with that money every single year, except there's no reimbursement from the state. And we're nickeling and diming projects, just trying to fill in holes versus getting a project that is a once-in-a-generation project that could change the landscape of the school park. I mean,
We don't get educational adequacy. We don't have the prospect of really retaining students because, parents are okay with sending their kid to a brand new facility, there's that, so go ahead, Al.
So if you to take it to the next phase is okay, so you don't do the bond. I think it just, Lucas said everything that needs to be said. You can see that how the red line on this basically says, okay, the green and the red line are really the two true values that we have to look at if we don't do the bond. Because that's the debt service drop off. If you go one more.
I didn't realize till COVID how much I licked my finger to turn pages.
You ain't one of those sponge things.
So basically, disregard this green one, because this green one's just if all the debt for the schools falls off. Like, this is how payments start. The orange one is the debt's falling off from old bonds, but that 3% maintenance requirement that now has to be met is being met. The blue line is maintenance is being met, bonds are falling off, and we have a new one.
Thank you.
Listen.
I can tell you on the finance team.
I asked questions, I got answers.
So another question that was asked was, what's going to happen with the bond rating for the Moody's bond rating for the town? Well, right now we're at 8.1. We will stay 8.1 with the bond rating. So it's not going to change the bond rating. It's not going to affect it at this point in time. So that was a big question. And then finally, we go over sort of pay-go. How does it work? And basically, the pay-go, I don't really want to go too far into this, but basically the money comes into the town. It's 15% of the amount.
It's 15% of our 42.8% base share ratio. So essentially, they have this calculation. Let's simplify it. The state comes up with a calculation, and they're giving us $8 million up front.
Right.
Essentially, we can use that for soft and hard costs. What that effectively means is that we don't have to really pull the bond money or do bond anticipation notes to cover our initial cost outlays, which makes it very palatable. In addition, we're also not paying juice on a bond, right? If we didn't have pay-go, we'd have to bond for the full 89 million. So one of the points I brought up to Harold, and he adjusted the number over the weekend, is if we didn't have pay-go, we'd have to borrow all of that money. Well, that money comes with interest. The pay-go eliminates all that interest because you're getting the money up front, comes off the top. So you have an effective savings from that as well. So there's a big, and then there's a readjustment at the end of the project. If we get that additional 15%, which we believe we will, they give you a readjustment, which
Yeah,
is.
it's about $2 million. You see it in the very first slide. At the very first, where we saved $2 million, $22 million, you also save $2 million, $2.8 million. And that can be used to decrease the bond amount, or if we want to make sure that we don't take, it could be used for many different things, but ultimately, I looked at it from a bond perspective and saying that we would take it off the bond.
Let's
So-
round that up
So
now.
does the ballot have to say $89 million?
Yes, it does.
So it's general assembly.
So when it comes to things like marketing, it's going to be important that it's difficult, it gets complicated to communicate, right? Because 89 million sounds like a lot more, but that's not the truth. The truth is really we're borrowing 81 million, and of that 81 million, we're only paying like 30, what was it, 38, 30, I forget off the top of my head. I gotta go look at the board.
Which one?
Our share of the principal and interest. Actually, it's more than that.
Yeah, it's-
Principal and interest is more
Right.
than that. But it's essentially the question, so we have to, we'll have to think about that moving forward on how we communicate that in a simple format.
So ultimately, the final thing on this was, I was very aggressive in when we took bonds out. I put all the bonds pretty much up front, where ultimately we could make some adjustments. It's the timing of when we get those bonds and how we pay things off. So there is savings here. There's a lot of savings that could be done further down the road, but it's all gonna come down to having the OPM in place, getting that timesheet ready to go, and just timing the money to come into the project at the right time as opposed to ahead of time.
So not to give our council members here too much of a preview, but the presentation, so the two parts of the presentation next week. One will be a packet, which will have a lot of this data in it, which will be more substantial. The presentation itself will kind of hit the high notes with questions in between that I think council's really going to have to answer moving forward. So things like, okay, if you move forward, how will you raise the revenue? Right? We're telling you it could be at 1.99%. That's an option. The other option is you don't want to recoup that debt payment, right? You want to keep the money for the town on the other end, but you still want to do the school project. So now you're at 3.45. You could ask the voters to approve 3.45 or 1.99 upfront. You could take a risk. It's always a risk under financial town meeting, and do increases over time, over a 2 to 3 year period to soften the blow and just integrate it in normal budget cycles. Those are questions that are going to have to be answered, because if you're going to do it up front, it's got to go with the ballot vote. So that is something to think about. Like, all right, so one option may be, okay, we're in favor of moving it forward, but we want to be honest to voters. We're going to have them approve it up front at 1.99%, build it in. They vote for the bond, they vote for the tax increase. The other option is they'll approve the bond, but we're just going to, we know we have to build that into our future budgets, and we'll financial plan that in. We'll take the risk, though, that if the voters vote it down, we're going to have to come up with the money to pay the debt, which is a concern, right?
4 years in, I don't have that level of trust.
I don't believe it. You don't trust the voters to approve a budget? No, and so these are the questions I
Or an
think,
expense they approve.
yes.
Both those things together.
Right. So we need to, I think, call out as a committee what things that we see from our side as being fundamental questions that the council needs to look at, in addition to maybe other thins that they're looking at.
So in part of your presentation, when you raise these questions, will you also make some, like you just did, recommendations or options, just so people understand what is possible when you ask these questions? Or you're gonna leave it to them to kind of figure out?
So I'm gonna outline a few different possibilities as we see it. Again, this is as we see it. But it really has to go to Ben and Lisa also to synthesize this, and it really comes down to the council. The council needs to provide clear direction to the town manager, because the council's in the driver's seat, to tell the town manager, this is the way we want to go. The town manager is, the council could certainly ask for additional information to back up our view on this, right? They could say, I don't believe you, Lou. I think there's 5 more options, or we need to verify your options. The update is simply to get the mind working, because we have another month to do that. And so the council could certainly say at the end of that meeting, okay, Ben, we want you to run the numbers with with the school side finance director to see what these options really look like. And what I think the ultimate recommendation is not what I recommend, it's gonna be what the town manager recommends. So he's gotta have the comfortability with it.
I like that. I think front loading information is important, because when you leave questions unanswered and there's gaps, I think that makes people feel uneasy.
Yeah.
Where if you say, here's a question for you, here are some things to consider, here are some options for you to look at, I think that gives people hope versus we can't answer this question, you need to figure that part out.
Yeah, go fish.
Right, exactly.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think we hit this most of the points.
And I know this is a slide for internal use, like we're talking about this, parts of it will probably go to the public, but I'd be careful about the property tax levy slide if we haven't decided on the property tax levy. Like throw out the different options.
Yeah.
But this slide that's telling you how much extra per year, how much extra per month is slightly dangerous this early in before we've decided what the levy will be for the project.
Well, we already saw it, right? We rolled something out of the
Yeah,
initial.
no,
vote.
I think
And, no, I'm saying,
Everyone
and it
loves
is
these.
dangerous, because the truth is that may not be the number, right? We're talking 3.45, and people go, what? Now
Yeah,
we're
and
like,
I'm a
well, maybe
fan.
that's not the case.
I'm a fan of these slides for the most part. It's just, right
It's just
now,
at
it's
this
using
point,
the lowest amount we would be thinking of levying, assuming in bonds, is kind of,
So I'll ask you this question, because I actually need the help on this, because I'm creating the presentation. There's been an ask by certain members of council and others to show that. So one option to do it is say, okay, if we went to the lowest rate, which is 1.73, this is what it'd be. We went to 1.9, which would smooth cash flow. That's what this would be. And then compare that to our full rate. If you just say, throw everything else out the window, we just want to levy our money,
Yeah.
levy our way there.
because of the fact that in the committee meeting, 1.99 sounds like it was decided on instead of 1.73, I'd just leave out the 1.73 entirely. And I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just saying, it sounds like we've decided 199 makes it so we never see a hole. That's a
Yeah.
more comfortable spot. And maybe show a greatest and the least. Like, if a council member outside of this room has asked for it, put it in it. But just be careful what percentage you decide to use, if you're not gonna use.
I think right now what we have to work with is 1.99, because that's what the finance team kind of, it's below the 2%, it smooths cash flow. Personally, I didn't want to show a negative on the cash flow. 'Cause I think just- it's not
and
what,
Dr. Dixon did mention that.
and Dr. Dixon brought that up.
If you wanted that.
Yeah, I'm sitting here and I'll tell you what's going through my mind now as a council person, and you've addressed some of these. The council needs to decide what to do with the school debt fall off. You've suggested that we use it for paying off the bond, but the council still has to make that decision. The council needs to decide what to do with the 8 million pay-go, which comes up front, how we're gonna use it. You made suggestions on what we do with that up front, but
The council doesn't determine that.
Yeah, I was gonna
No,
say, I think that's,
They
so,
can't-
but
That's already
That's not
taken
an
care
there's
of.
certain limitations to the use.
The pay-go is used for the project, so that's up to really the building committee and the finance.
Is it up to them?
If-
Okay,
well, and it can't be used to pay down the bond, like, it can't be
No, I
used to pay off interest.
I know we talked about that, but
It would be based on the project schedule and what the immediate expenses are, the smooth cash flow. So it'd be something that the school building committee with the finance director would do.
I'll
That's part of
strike
the
bullet number 2, we go on to
Yeah.
bullet number 3. We need to decide the amount of the tax levy. You've suggested it. We need to decide amount of tax levy and whether it's all at once or it's maybe divided over 2 or 3 years. And we need to decide how we're going to get that tax levy on a ballot, whether it's going to be incorporated into the referendum or something else. We need to determine how to handle cash flow issues, which are anticipated there may be some cash flow issues. We have to determine that. We need to determine how much to borrow at what time limit. You've suggested 40 million, I think year 1 and 40 million the next year.
That's just an
That's
aggressive.
just- That is very aggressive, but that's something, a point of discussion. We need to determine how we're going to plan for capital improvement projects that the town has on its list. And then we really need to think about decisions on the project and as a whole and how it fits into a long-range plan. In other words, what happens after this project is completed? What's the vision for where the school is going to go, consolidation or what have you? That's sort of my short list of questions that are going through my mind, and I know they're coming through some other members' minds because we have some people who are very, very sharp financially, and they're going to ask all these questions and they're going to dig into it far greater than I'll be able to do it. So these are some of the things that are going through my mind, and we're going to need recommendations. We're getting your recommendations, tonight in Harold's group, which is wonderful. But we also need to present all this to the manager and our finance director to see what their recommendations would be also.
And the intent of that meeting is also Ben was here last night.
Yes.
But these updates are meant they're to council, but obviously Ben and Lisa are there. They're also updates to them, to kind of let them know where we're at,
True.
right? And so the idea being that once you have the information, he has that information, she has that information, you as a council can say, okay, this is where, council would provide direction saying, okay, Ben, we want you to X. We want you to look at these questions and figure out more data on X, Y, Z and come back at the next meeting, which is a month away, with the building committee to answer our other questions and determine, what does a financial plan look like granularly, So, and you may say, you may say, give more direction one way or another. So.
No, I understand that. So when will the rest of the council members and the manager and the finance director get a copy of the presentation that's going to be made Monday night?
They're going to get it Monday night. and the reason is, as I explained, there's no vote taken.
Right.
Honestly, I haven't even prepared the presentation. I'm working like a dog this week. So
Oh, I understand.
it's going to be a weekend challenge. I'm going to put the presentation together. We're going to be linking up and doing some stuff. Phil's helping me provide some components. But there's nothing that, and to be honest with you, the presentation is going to be more, I don't want to say visual, but it needs context of a dialogue.
Sure.
So the backup packet that will go along with it. So it's not like a typical meeting, we talked about this, it's not like an RFP where you have to make a decision that night on a purchase. The whole point is to present it in context, give you a packet, say, you have a month, look at it, ask questions, come back to us, work with Ben, work with Lisa, and then we'll continue to work on it based on the questions and direction given. We'll come back. The packet will really come in prior to the vote. So that one will be a substantial packet of final recommendations in November that will go to you for, here's our final, highest and best of what we think. Ben, I would assume, is going to have his packet of what he thinks highest and best is for the town. And at that point, it's really going to be a council decision. I mean, the building committee is going to kind of back out and say, you have the information, make a decision, and Ben's going to have to provide a final recommendation.
Well, I'm just emphasizing, the more information they can get to members of the council and the manager and the finance director, the better.
Yep.
The less information they have, the more delays there will be. There aren't that many meetings between now and the middle of November.
Right.
Probably about 3.
There's like 17, right? Like,
My
I'm sorry, what did you
expectation.
say, Jim?
I was kidding. I said there's like 17, right?
Yeah, right?
17, yeah, and they're all 10 hours long each, yes, I understand.
So just so you know, like October's packet, like October's presentation will probably be substantial amount of final information. And then we'll follow up on that shortly thereafter, and that'll be it. So you'll have it in time. It'll have plenty of time to soak this in.
I need to X out my bullet number 2.
I have a question about one of your bullet points.
Yeah.
If we divide the tax levy over multiple years, where am I voting one time saying yes to it all over those years, or every year I have to vote for it?
No, it's just one vote.
The reason you
No,
would,
no, excuse me, I asked that question, but I'll check on it again. If we ask for, to say 2%, and that's the total amount we want, that's gonna be one vote. But if we decide we want 1% and then another 1% the next year, that's 2 different votes at 2 different times.
So I could potentially say yes to a school project now and then forget that I wanted to do that because now I don't like this increase and I could vote it down?
Yes,
so if we didn't live in the parallel universe here in Coventry, we didn't have a financial town meeting, right?
Which is no longer actually how our budget's determined.
Right. Many councils have authority to approve their budget. So what they typically would do is they'd say, okay, we don't want to levy everything up front. So as a council, we're going to plan this out over 3 years. And we know that we're going to allocate 1% per year over the next 3 years to cover the debt. Because it's under the council's purview, they build it in, there's certainty, right? It's already built into the financial plan. The unfortunate reality here is you would approve it along with all the other appropriations you need to have. So there's two issues with that. It dilutes your normal appropriations, right, for operations, because you're maxed out at 4%. So if you're taking 1% to put it to the project, you're now at 3%. And the second thing is the voters voted down. You don't have any raised levy. And so therefore, and by year 3, you think they're going to remember the debt they voted for?
It's
So-
like the year we all voted on the budget, yes, at the meeting, when we still did the financial town meeting, and then we voted no on the tax levy.
Right.
In the same meeting.
Yes.
And I'm not
This
quite,
would be spread out, and like you said, some people wouldn't be maliciously not voting for the debt that they've already voted to approve.
But if it's rolled in with other things,
they don't know.
Yes, no, I agree with you. I wouldn't put it out over years.
yeah, I don't think that's a good idea.
They have to cover the debt. That's the only thing they have to do. The town doesn't have to vote on. They don't have to
On the
approve.
bond,
it.
they have to vote on the bond.
They call it out typically as voting for to pay the debt, but the levy itself is voted separately,
But it might be on the same ballot.
which happened one year. They voted not
Can
to
we make it
pay the
one,
debt, which is,
can we make it one question? Like, I'm voting for an $89 million bond and a
Which includes,
3.45% tax levy to pay it.
we have to get a legal opinion on that because I asked the question, but it's a good question.
I mean, I'd like it to be a yes or no. I don't want people to have the option to be like, yeah, I want a new school.
I
No,
don't
wanna
think you
pay
can
for it.
directly tie the vote itself, but you can have 2 measures. One that's increasing the taxes, one that's the authorization. I don't think you can,
Spend it on.
I don't believe you can weave it into the authorization. But it can be on the same ballot,
But 2 separate questions.
the 2 separate questions. So I mean, the assumption would be, and I think has to be marketed appropriately, if you vote for the bond, vote for the,
You voted for the levy.
correct. Ding, ding,
I
ding.
find that
You gotta pay
definitely
for it.
as a taxpayer, I find that I want it on the same bond, yes, and we need to market it to say, if you're voting yes on this, you need to vote yes on this. Otherwise, this is gonna go.
But it's a good question, and I'm glad Council President Dixon's bringing it to the solicitor to get clarification, because it is something we do need clarification.
It's part of how the bond is
Right,
presented.
below, right, below.
Yes, on the bond. Can we get a rendering? of
All right,
that?
I'm gonna rope it in because time is ticking. Do we have any last questions? I need to move on, so.
The only other thing I
Yep.
have was the 1.99%. Like, that's strictly school bond. All that money is going to this project. There's no Trojan horse. It's not, I know that during our presentation, there was a council person that asked if we could maybe build in additional projects to the bond vote?
So in a point of clarity, and I mentioned this last night, we're conservative on our estimates. So what I had said is, in a best case scenario, let's say the interest rate's not 4%, it's 2.5. Let's say we roll the debt in a strategic way where we're recouping some savings. There will be potentially some fund balance, some surplus. That happens a lot. You make best estimates. If we do, good for the town. They can use that excess, put it into fund balance and use those funds. But obviously it would be, there was a discussion last night, oh, do we project a different way? Maybe go to 3%, but I think that's dangerous. I think, you undershoot and over-deliver on things. You don't do the opposite. So my gut's telling me there may be some fund balance that comes out of that, but that's not intentional. It's just good planning.
Okay.
But I think
That's not intentional.
Christine asked a very good question, and that is, if the taxpayers approve the tax levy of whatever percent it is, does that money have to be used, once it's collected, does it have to be used for the bond?
Well, we have to pay the bond debt.
Right.
We do have to pay the bond debt, but she asked the question, does it have to be used to pay the bond debt? And my guess is it does not. It goes into our assets, what we collected, and then,
Correct.
but we have to pay our debt somehow or other. That doesn't necessarily mean we've got to use all that money that was designated, whether it's 3.5 or 1.1, to pay the debt.
So effectually, yes, it is allocated because you have to pay the debt. It's like getting a bill and saying, well, I don't want to pay that debt. Well, you have to pay the debt.
Yeah.
So
But if the interest.
is it specifically earmarked? No, but you have to pay the debt. So I look at it, I simplify everything. I say input, output. You need the input to put the output. It doesn't matter where the input comes from.
But to go with your other debt, tax levy percentage, the 1.99 is assuming we're going to take all school debt we're currently paying and allocate that payment to new school debt. You're going with a higher tax levy says you're paying for your school, and because of debt falling off, you might have additional monies to put into other school projects. Or, so no, we're not saying 3.45 would go to other projects, but we might end up with additional surplus because of debt falling off that has nothing to do with this project.
Sure.
So
But the assumption is that this 199 is
to pay
for
the
this
debt.
school project.
For the school project.
It was calculated based on this one.
So and I'll leave you with this. I wasn't going to mention this, but I'll mention it. One of the things that the council could do is say, okay, this is creative thinking. Sitting in a town manager's seat. Okay, we're going to go for the 3.45, but then we're going to package the project as a roadway enhancement rebuild Coventry bond. And the reason is because we're going to take that 1.5 and we're going to allocate it to specific capital projects, and we're going to market it as that. It doesn't matter where the money comes from, right? It's coming from the debt fall, but we're marketing as a rebuild Coventry bond because when they allocate that 3.45, that's going to cover schools. The debt fall off is going to cover the other projects. The taxpayer only sees a rebuild Coventry bond, which really, the bond is really allocated to schools, but you're committing the additional debt fall off to other, which is something I had recommended a year ago, that the town come in on this from a marketing perspective, because I think a lot of people would be very partial to a townwide rebuilding bond because they know the roads are falling apart. They know the other stuff. They may not have children, but they want their roadway fixed and they want the bridge painted. So that is an option that I will bring up also with the presentation. So, okay.
I think it's a scary option to bring up in a public presentation. Like, this would be a good way
Yeah.
to package this.
Well, I don't think it's, but it's not nefarious. It's good financial planning.
It's not, but what's not nefarious in a meeting amongst adults who
Sure.
are interested in the project is nefarious
To
amongst the people who love Coventry but hate living here. Facebook page.
I mean, in the end of the day, you're being forthright. If you approve this increase, you're getting this.
Right, but
That's
I
the-
wouldn't call it like, if, to say, if we charge this tax levy, then debt falling off can go towards other town projects. If we use this levy, then that debt that falls off goes towards this project.
It's just you're not committing it up front.
No, but you know what? We'd
People
be
don't like
lying if
coffee,
we
right?
said we were, because in 4 years, we'll have a whole new council. So us saying we're gonna do a road project right now does not mean we're gonna do a road project.
Without a policy to back it up, you're right. So, all right, I'll leave it at that. We need to move on. I'm gonna go over to the communications team. So Don,
Yeah, I'm gonna try to keep it pretty tight here. So I've had a few different meetings with a few different people. I have a committee of about 8 or 9 people, but we have struggled to get all members to attend because of people's schedules. Half of my committee are people who are working in the private sector and they have other obligations. So I'm gonna pivot a little bit back to a more of a virtual model because I think I got more attendance when I did virtual meetings than I did when I did in-person meetings. And I'm just gonna do like a poll of my members to find out when they're available. But I also have Phil on as a consultant or as a member of that committee. And so I get to communicate with Phil pretty much anytime I need to. So he's been very supportive of this project. Amy and I and Craig met with Luke, I guess, 2 weeks ago, and we went over a number of things that needed to be done in terms of a punch list. So there's a lot of things happening sort of at one time. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and then I was going to share some things with you, is something I think is exciting is one of the members of our committee is the marketing and graphics teacher at the high school, the pathway. And her kids, I think it's her juniors, are designing the logo, and she's having them go through a very professional process of design. We gave them the specs, I guess, essentially of what we were looking for and or possibly looking for. She previewed with us, I think, 3 logos, but has 4 more after today. There's gonna be 4 more coming. Each one is gonna be in a PowerPoint. So my subcommittee will tease them out and then give them feedback, but then I'll probably bring something here. Conceptually, they're kind of going with this acorn model because a tree is fully grown, and an acorn kind of represents regrowth and establishment, and so they kind of are thinking of the tree, but don't want it to be exactly a tree because everything else in Coventry is a tree or an elephant. So they were trying to come up with something that set it off a little bit. I don't want to say more than I should because it's their project, but I think it's interesting how they're thinking about it and they're trying to represent all the different buildings and all the different schools in their logo design. So I think it should be interesting. I also think it's good to include them in this project for their own personal education and growth, but I also think it's good PR in itself to be able to then say to the community, here's the logo and it's designed by our kids in our school for our project. I think that sells very well. It's not done yet, but we're in that process. So starting this week is open house. And as you know, or maybe don't know, open house was switching to a virtual platform. So when Luke and I and Amy met with Craig, we had some idea it could happen, but then it did happen. And so our to-do list changed a little bit because everything we had to prepare really need to be prepared for a virtual experience versus an in-school experience. Like Amy and I had met and we had talked about, getting a table and having boards and having a table skirt and having a projector and a screen with images, and like all of that kind of got pushed aside because that didn't exist anymore. So I went old school here. I didn't do electronic. I wasn't sure what I'd be able to share. If you want to pass these around, I did try to save paper, so things are back to back. So I'm just going to orient you to this a little bit, and this is for you to keep and look at and give me feedback later. So this front part is like a template. This is not complete, but this is something that Amy and I are kind of collaborating on. This may not be the final product, but for this project to go forward, there has to be a communication piece that's tightly aligned to a calendar logistics piece. And so Amy and I are kind of working on that together. The little table on top was just like off the top of my head thought of the kinds of things you would do per month. Amy's going to talk later and build on that way better than what I have here. But there's a lot of to-dos on here that we're looking to kind of plan out. The next page for you is a script. So one of the things we talked about is a speaking script. This was going to be created no matter what, because our team talked about having a script prepared for people to be able to speak on this project, whether it was over the PA system at a football game, at a table, at an open house presentation, whatever, but we wanted a script. So I started it, and Phil's team worked on it a little bit. one of the things Phil's team came up with is if the script was set alone, it would be fine, but if you wanted the script to align to a presentation, we created a presentation. So when you see slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, those slides are these slides. You've seen all these slides before. Nothing here is brand new. It's just to provide a visual to go with the script, if that makes sense. Am I going too fast?
No.
So that was sort of the intent of that. Skipping along, you're gonna get to a page that looks like this. This is a flyer that was developed by Phil's team. I think there's been 6 or 7 versions of this flyer. If there needs to be a 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th version, he will tweak it for us. This is for your consideration, but I will say we've already started sharing this. There is a placeholder up top. We just have our Coventry Schools logo. But one of the things our team talked about is once the graphics kids are done, we're gonna put their logo up. We're gonna put this on a large sheet of laminated paper, and we're gonna have it posted at every entrance of every building. So when people come into the schools, they'll see this image with that logo, and there's a QR code on there that leads to our website. So that's the flyer. If you're on social media, this flyer went out on social media. It got shared a lot. It got viewed a lot. It got a lot of positive, I think, feedback. I also asked every principal at open house to share it on their listserv. So it went out on listservs, and you'll see them if you're the parents of a school that hasn't had open house yet. It's coming out. And then, and one of the reasons why we sent this flyer the way we did is Phil had shared with us a presentation from Portsmouth. And Portsmouth was preparing for the actual bond vote. But one of the slides in their presentation was exactly what's happening at each school. Because when I shared the original video that Phil had created that showed Feinstein, some of the feedback back on social media was, well, how about the rest of the school? How about Western? How about this? How about that? So we wanted to create a flyer that began to answer that question of what is happening in other places. And I think that conversation will continue to happen. And then this next page that starts here, this is just the website, right? So on our front page, and Amy can maybe bring up our front page. On our front page of our website, there's icons that go across the middle, one for every school. The last icon says school construction website or school building website. Amy will bring it up in a second. So that link is now live. Jim did a lot of work on it. He got our school point people to help support that a little bit. I just want to show you what it looks like.
We should also put it on Coventry, Connecticut's, because.
We should. Notice what just happened there. Amy typed into Google Coventry schools, and we were the first one to come up.
Are you paying for that?
Finally.
Yeah.
6 months ago, we did not come up at all.
I know, I know.
So I need.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
It's not for some reason.
Can you make the screens?
Can we pass the budget to them?
We could.
Okay.
It's probably the projector screen
It's a
ratio.
small school, it's a small school.
It's all
Go
right.
back a
We'll
page.
take the budget right to them.
Go back to home. You scroll to the
Maybe
top.
it's a really affluent small school.
Maybe.
Well, wait, right.
If not, still up to ask them.
There you go.
But they have in their budget buying birds of cows, you know, so I mean, that might not fit with us.
Yeah.
I gotta say, your middle school has some athletes, man. You guys are
I
killing
don't
it.
know why it's not working.
Pretty good.
At
Knock on wood.
least. So
Kids
the-
needed a
Because of
little bit of.
They did. Even
So,
cross
I
country
think
this year has tons of kids on it again, not as many as 2 years
it's- No,
ago.
but we're still good.
And
Yep.
they're fast little buggers.
So it's working on my computer, Don.
Yep.
They start marketing
It's
this
right
first.
on mine.
Honestly, I would say something like this, it's funny,
It's probably
but
because it's.
parents are
Can you
standing
see over
around
here?
this.
It says school construction. I know it's small, but it's right over here. And we also set it off in red so that it, maybe your eye would be drawn to that. The rest of them are all set off in white, and we put a red box. You see that at the end? Around that one. So when you click on it, that takes you to the pages that I just shared with you. I purposely designed this to be in a simple format. You can put the lights back on it if you're don't mind.
The
link
from the flyer worked. You know, the little
Yep.
icon thing.
And so this is the actual website. It has sort of a small blurb about what the incentive is and what we're eligible for. It has the dollar bill logo. If you turn page, It has some more graphics. The video that I shared is embedded here and it works. We made sure it works. We also resized everything, Phil, so everything, whether you're on a phone or a computer. We put some more information about the middle school project. And this is not done, right? Because this is evolving. So every time we create new content, we're either going to add or switch out, depending on where we are in the process. So we have a website. And then the only last thing is that Amy's going to do this as part of her presentation, is Amy built a short video. And the video has been shared with the principals to share out with the parents. Her video is a little bit different in the sense of she had some images from, what's his name? Josh Choppy had gone to the schools. And we have some images that are not so nice, right? Because there are some things that don't look so wonderful in our schools. And we wanted people to know, like, this is the need. And so we put that, and I know Christine's happy because when we were talking at the original presentation, we looked at the boards. Sometimes when you looked at the before and the after, they looked a little similar. We wanted the before picture to be like significantly different. So people knew, like, this is the need. So Amy can show that when she does her piece. Any questions for me?
Take it to the committee.
I do have one comment.
Yes.
And I've already passed this on to you. I've been working with a gentleman who is volunteering to help me identify the profile of the voter. And where in Coventry would you most likely find the greatest population of people who are between the ages of 30 and 60. Chances are they have kids in the schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he was over my home last night, yesterday morning, we had a meeting. I was excited and I showed him this flyer. And he said, this does not mean anything to me because I want to know how much it's going to cost me. So somewhere in this materials, we have to have something that helps people understand how much it's going to cost me. Because I thought this was quite attractive. There's a lot of information here, et cetera. So
Actually more
we just
easy to
can't-
read than I would expect it to be.
What?
It's, when you first look at it, you're like, oh, that's busy, but it's actually pretty easy to read.
It's easy for us because we've been thinking about this, you
Yeah.
know, a
No,
long
I know.
time. And we know, when we look at MS, we immediately think middle school, or ES, we immediately think elementary school, et cetera. But I just want to know that one piece that we've got to consider is the cost to the taxpayer. And that's difficult because we don't know what the tax levy is going to be and a few other critical components. But somewhere along the line, we need to get that in.
And you guys can point me in a different direction. I kind of discussed this with Amy and Luke and Craig a little bit, and a few others in sidebar conversations. My initial strategy was to make people fall in love with the project. I want people to love the project and to be thinking about the project from a point of like, this is what we want and need. And then we would start to pivot the financial piece. I didn't want to front load with finance, because I thought if I front loaded with finance, people would just get stuck on numbers. And it's like when you go grocery shopping, either you look at the pants, then the price, or you look at the price, then the pants. I always look at the price, then the pants. And then before I even,
If you
know
buy
that.
pants in the grocery store, I don't know where
did I say grocery store?
We did that.
Long day, long day.
I got nothing, I'm out.
I will say though, just based on the fact that you're talking about content change. So, and I agree with you and I totally see what you're saying, but I feel almost like this flyer is going to be looked at more by parents. And the flyer you're talking about is going to be looked at more townwide. So like this gets us through council, right? Like this gets us, council approves, we're moving this forward. We decide what the levy is going to be.
Then you start.
That's when we make a different flyer.
I understand.
I
Yeah,
think.
it's really funny you say that because, so my group met on a Sunday evening, and I think the most important thing that came out of that was about a week and a half ago was what Alita Hall said. And she said, I just want to remind you that it's really two phases here. She said the first phase is really about informing and getting people to talk to their council members about their thoughts around this for that vote that happens in November, right? The second phase is that goes through is around getting people to vote for the bond. So I agree with her 100% that I understand the whole money piece. I think I've been the one a lot of the times at the table saying, make sure we talk about the money because it's so important to the people that all live around me.
You
That's
always
what-
said that. You
I
always
did,
said that.
they say it all the time, that's all I hear when we're talking about things is the money. But Alita's right, you have to, if we turn them off just because of the price tag right now and not, they'll never get the information about the project. So I thought that was super important, and Don said it really well too, when he was talking about the fact that I want to sell the project first.
Yes.
I want to get them excited about it, so I agree that the money is super important, and I also think selling the project is.
Because the money piece has a lot of different caveats to it too, because it's what we decide from the levy is gonna have one story if we decide to pay for the whole thing with the levy, and a different story altogether if we decide to let bonds fall off to help pay for it. And what has to be part of both those stories is the 3% capital funds that we need to put into this project, into schools, no matter what.
Which is almost like a
So-
whole piece in and of itself,
It-
right? The
It
finances.
goes along with both stories. So we want to get to a place where we're not like, we're trying to decide if it should be 1.99 or 3.5. We have to get past that point, I think, before we could put that on here.
We need that information.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you, and we're not ready for that information, but I'm just telling you, first blush,
Yep,
okay, and when we were getting ready to go out to try to get people to vote for the last budget, you know how many people said, how much is this gonna cost, and that was. for
Totally.
each homeowner, and that was from members of our own council.
Yep.
So at that point, we've got to get to that point as quickly as possible.
And I think we will, like I've stressed before, I think in the council phase, we're not quite as critical because we don't even know if we're moving forward. We have to convince you first, right?
Right.
We may not get past go. Once go happens, we'll have 3 to 4 months to really lay out. Now we'll have a clear financing plan, and that's, so I have 2 comments. One is, actually, Kim made it very good on one of my points, so I think I'll leave it there as far as the financing when that rolls out. The second thing is, though, and we've talked about it, people are gonna be self-interested. This is a great piece, and I love it. But I think, and this is more work, if I'm a parent at Western, I don't really care all that much because people don't think beyond where they're at about the other schools, so it's almost like you need one flyer just for Western. This is what's gonna get replaced in granular. The well that doesn't work is gonna get fixed. The dumpy bathroom that they see every day is gonna get repaired. And this is how much is gonna be allocated, and maybe a nice image of what it could be, or something, right? That's it, nice and clean, right? It gives people a self-interested. Maybe eventually, not now, eventually there's a video specific to Western that shows some clips from Western's issues and the improvements at Western. Same thing for, now multiply that times every school. It's a lot more work, but I think then it goes out to the listservs, to the parents in that school, the students in that school. And again, we're not advocating, we're informing. This is what's gonna go in your school, these improvements are gonna be made. Because I do see this as being a little watered down to some who are saying, well, all right, so we're doing gymnasium renovation, all this stuff. Well, how much is actually going to Western? Because my kid's in Western right now.
but every kid, not every kid, a majority of kids going to Western are also gonna go to middle school. So I would have everyone have the middle school and high school and the elementary school specific one. So it's like, this is going to Black Rock, this is where they'll go after Black Rock to the middle school and the improvements you'll see there.
Yeah, so
And this is what you'll see in
each
the high
elementary
school.
school should be the elementary school and the middle
And
school,
the high school.
and then the middle school
Because
should be the
as
middle
a
school and the high
Washington
school.
Oak parent, I'd be like, I'm gonna pay for an 89 million bond that's gonna give me $400,000.
Yeah, so I think
I
maybe
wanna
front,
see
even
that I'm
front and
getting-
back, the back side's the middle school, the front side's the specific school.
Right.
But
I think
I don't know,
that's-
I'm throwing that out there, so it's for discussion,
I
just
think,
that's my
I think
feeling.
that's not hard to do. I think, we just need to pull from the stage 2, like, what specifically is happening at each school. So people understand that.
What would be really cool is kind of treat it like the presentation that you guys did. And this map, if I could just click on Washington Oak and it would show me like, this is what Washington
We
Oak is
can
gonna
hyperlink URLs into our map. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's easy.
that's great.
Look at that.
That's a great
So
idea.
dope for the
And we have to remember the people who don't have kids in schools.
Mhm.
That's a huge population out there.
We should do the presentation from the new senior center. And be like,
It's
this
on the
is the
schedule.
school's presentation. Because
On the schedule.
the police got that station because they built a senior center. So they reached their voters. They were like,
They did.
this is how we're getting our police station, is by also helping you. And I agree. I think that there should definitely be a way of attaching this to the other town improvements that have been able to be done.
So my thought had been pretty much of like, I'm telling a story, right? Like, but that's the approach I'm trying to take in this. I don't want to just put lots of random things out at one time. I want to lead people like down a path, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's sort of like the story we're telling. We're hey, that's a great Feinstein project, but how about my school? Here's a little bit more. And maybe what Luke's suggestion is a good suggestion. Here's a little bit more. And then eventually, how much is this going to cost me? Well, here's a little bit more. And it gets people sort of to a certain place. I don't know, that, and I'll take any feedback. This is for you to take home. If you want to change anything, give input. Obviously, anything is up for negotiation and conversation. It's, you know, we're a subcommittee for this committee, and that's our sub-team.
Sub-team.
The only thing else I would say on this is kind of define student-centric. The rest of it I can understand, just looking at it, but 57% of this project is student-centric. And what is that?
Yeah, we can do that.
I don't know that people know MEP means in context.
I mean, there are a number of
Yeah, right. I don't
acronyms
know
like
what MEP
ADA
means,
and things like
But
that.
it looks like air quality.
So here's what we'll do in the interest of giving Amy time to present is, you have the flyer within, Don, you know, this week, I'd say, right, by Friday. If you have comments, if you could just put it down in email form, and you can email you directly.
Yeah, and then I'll work with Phil, because he's built this out, so he's got the capacity to make the adjustments.
Okay.
I mean, this flyer as it stands is out, right? But, so what we're talking about is like, what's the next version of this flyer?
So as the team leader, you can just feel free to email Don directly on any comments on the flyer as you see it. We can make necessary adjustments as quick as possible and keep moving forward.
Can I ask, not for the flyer, but when we get to the point of how much does it cost me, can I just suggest that slide, can you have a dollar value, like without the school bond, like this much per like the 1.5 million or 1.2 million that we need to find for that anyway? So assuming that came from a levy, right?
Oh,
So
that's super
what
smart.
you're gonna pay, if you don't do it, but you're gonna pay
We have to get
this much
3% a
per
year
month.
anyway, which is
Yeah.
gonna cost us
Like,
this.
so you're gonna pay this much per month to get the 3%, and you get equals no school, or you're gonna
Right.
pay this much per
For
month,
masking tape and
which
spit.
equals that, and you get this brand new school, like,
Right,
you know,
right,
something
right.
like that, get into those, when you're
Like,
talking
maybe
about what you're gonna pay.
I don't wanna like poison the well, but I think the other part of it that becomes part of the conversation eventually is, if we don't have to always figure out a way to pay for the maintenance, then that adjusts the ask that the school department may need from the town, or for what the town may need from the community, right? Like, if we have to always budget for the 3%, we're always gonna have to ask for money to support that, because we don't have that kind of cash sitting around, which means it's always gonna end up at the community.
It's just a difficult narrative to tell.
I know.
It gets complicated,
That's why I
like
said
everything,
it's
right? So I think your idea of, personally, I think your idea of breadcrumbs, that's one breadcrumb further down the line.
Way down.
I like unfunded mandate. The state has issued us an unfunded mandate that's gonna cost us this.
Everybody loves that.
Because unfunded mandates are the tricky words.
People love that phrase. They
I
love that.
will also say though, to Ann's point, if any of us are someplace talking about this project or handing out this flyer, we should be able to say, you know, the levy hasn't been set yet, someplace between, 2% and 3.5%, which would equal this. So even if we're speaking to this before we get to that point, we should at least be able to give something. We can decide what that will be. But I think if you have talking points and you're like, I have no idea how much this is gonna cost the average voter, that just ticks people off.
It's fair. All right, we'll move on to the logistics team.
Yeah, so I'm gonna first piggyback on what John did. So, being a teacher at heart, you wanna reach people in different ways. And some people are gonna read a flyer, some people are going to listen to a presentation, and some people like to see it, right? So it was a conversation that we had at our meeting and decided I'd just throw it out and stab at this. I'm an amateur video person. no experience or professional training, so be easy on me, guys. But what I do want is feedback. So if we do decide to do another one, whether it's Phil who does it or I do another one, I know we need better footage. I know we need more, and I know there's some things that we need that are gonna be like pictures that show what we're hoping for. So when you take a look at this, keep notes, and then you can email me too. I don't know if we have to get into a huge discussion about it, but this is the video that we sent out also.
So principals were asked to embed this in their presentations to.
Sure. No, this isn't my computer,
The
so.
speakers turned up.
There's a little sound. Oh.
All the way, that's how it
Good play
goes.
on the left.
That's it.
On the, if you minimize that, on the right-hand side, I think the master volume.
Try to play. I
Like
think
if you
she
hit
stopped
escape.
it when she turned up the volume.
And then on your normal sound volume, can you see it? Yeah, right there. Is that all the way up?
There we
There you go.
Yep, I got it. My Mac, it's right here on the keyboard.
go.
We have a Mac.
Sorry, guys, I'm a Mac.
You're not a professional videographer and you have a Mac.
Oh, it's not coming through all the way. I think.
Minimize it so that- Yeah. Take away from-
I'm sorry. Try one more time.
It's in speed, yeah, leave it just like that.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine, that's fine, yeah.
That's good. Sorry about that.
Pull it back.
Jeez. That's the.
Fine, that's.
Please, that's where it is.
It's a Christmas
It's
story.
everywhere.
Everywhere, that's the problem. make it go down.
Sure.
Nice.
Music makes me want to do a rave in here.
I love the picture. Was there like a piece of, I don't know, cardboard or something taped to a wall,
Yeah.
covering up a hole? Is that what
Yeah,
you saw on
it
that
was.
slide?
So I will say the one fearful thing about that presentation is sharing it without a person talking about it. I'm like really nervous that I'm sending my kids to the schools. I mean, it looks really bad. You're just taking all the bad parts and pointing them out in one video together. And
Wait,
it's a very good video with either someone talking over it, like there's time to fix it. You know, there's a way to fix it.
We talked about that. We even talked about a person to do it, to do the talk over. So that has a great voice that can handle that.
Kim, I wanted to see more mold. I didn't see enough mold.
You did make me think
I'll
of
send you
something
some
though.
pictures. 'cause
Let's
I got-
do it.
I got loads of them right now.
God,
No, but I'm just saying, I want to see more mold.
but Warwick schools are being shut down.
Yeah.
And that might be kind of a conversation as well. Like, while we can still go to our schools, let's fix them before things other than COVID are getting our kids sent home for a week. Because isn't it true? Like, there's schools in Warwick, they just sent the kids home. They're like, you
yeah,
can't be here.
it's true. They're out right now. Mold issues.
Because of mold issues.
Something, you know, a vision came across my head of a video, like somebody pushing a food cart across the football field and saying, you know, would you push a cart this far to a cafeteria? And it's some older person trying to wheel this cart across the actual high school football field.
Except it was uphill.
And then, you know, kind of saying, this is what happens every day at the middle school.
Bring them to
TF
TF Green Airport and have them do the whole thing.
Right.
There's like,
We could definitely do something like that.
And I think if you think that the picture are too much for people to see and that we need a narration, then we shouldn't have them do that. But I do think that you have to send out at some point what it looks like in
Yeah.
the schools.
no, I think you need that
It
stuff
is
in
what
there. I
it
do.
is. And it's like that everywhere. It's not just these pictures.
And maybe some of the fixes, make sure you're saying like new high school gym, show new windows, be like new windows at Western.
Yeah.
Because it makes it look like everything's going to the middle school. And I know the mother load is going to the middle school.
Yeah.
But kind of going to your point, you showed parts of every school that has issues. And I know you can't show that same school, but be like, this would go to Western, this would go to Huffins
I think
Hill.
that's what the next picture is.
The narration idea, I think, is good. I used to use, you know, Fiverr.com.
Yeah.
They actually have good narrators on there. I would create a script. I'd make my own videos and you can have people narrate it like the James Earl Jones.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, any voice, yeah.
But you can do any voice if you have some logo, but I think having a script.
There's a guy in the
That's
middle
all.
school who does like a podcast class that Elliot took last year. Have the kids narrate it.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
that's great. Others on the video
I
or?
keep getting lost in this snippet of slide here. I almost feel like we need to extend this gray box down so that the proposed bond, 89.2 million, is included in that snippet, because when I saw it in the video, that information was missing from there. So if I don't know what's going on, I might say, oh, I only have to worry about $38 million because it says Coventry under there. I lose that. I mean,
You
I
lose
add
the perspective of how much.
yeah,
we
I mean, I add quick, so for me, like, I know it means it's combined, but somebody who's seeing it for the first time might not know that the bond's actually for that value.
Right, regardless of what the
Point.
state's reimbursing, we're taking out
Yeah.
an $89 million.
And we can always just state it, investment, $89 million.
Okay. I did put the other part up there, again, just can't even see this. So far, these are the things that are
Interesting,
kind of
wait.
booked out to us to go to through the month of September and October. So a bunch of them open houses, but also the football game announcements, Coventry soccer, the week of the first weekend in October. Each of the PTO meetings for the elementary schools, the elementary principals are going to present at those meetings. These are the things in yellow are the things that we're still trying to figure out. A few things, the homecoming football game, and the homecoming parade. Is there an opportunity for us to figure out how we can get information out on those particular events?
Gonna make a
This is the Career and Tech Center Community Night at the high school. And the other one is the football game in October. Underneath here is other events that they put on that list. So we're waiting for, talk to Jason Martin about Coventry basketball. I reached out to Stop and Shop and see if there's an opportunity for us a few times to have a table out there and dig into pamphlets and put information out there. I have one of the committee members whose child is in preschool, working at, talking to preschools about as an opportunity that we leave pamphlets on their tables or whatnot to give out at different preschools. At the Friendly Sons meeting in October, one of the people on the, whatever they call their board, is going to share information. And then Mr. Levis said that he would give us a bingo schedule and whatnot of the events that are at the community center for us. So that's where we are right now. So
Can we play?
Sorry?
Bingo.
Yeah, can we play?
We got a nice little room set up for it.
Amy, we can have bingo, bingo. We can have the table out Stop and Shop. Could we get like the Girl Scouts, because they're gonna be out with cookies soon, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe get one at their table, if we can't get one.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Something at
I
their
buy
Get us a
cookies
nice
at that
draw.
table every year, they
Yeah.
catch me, and I'm always just like, I don't have any money, they're like, we take Zelle and Venmo.
I know, now they take
it.
We do have on the list, the bigger list, there's like Dave's is on there and other places in the community. We just have to reach out to these ones that I reached out to.
How about, can I ask this too? They also have, God, I can't think of what, but the soccer, up at Fish Hill Road.
Yeah, that's
And
this one.
that like needs to get done like soon because I'm worried about that, but that would be awesome. Because
Yeah,
they
that's
have,
that one, that's. the
they have
one.
signs that you could buy, all kinds of stuff. And if you ask me, I can talk with Dana and see if we could get something like really,
Dana DeBerna?
yeah. And see if we could do it cheaper or even just. do
Yeah,
it
she does the
outright.
Coventry Substance Abuse Task Force, and her husband's the president of
Yeah, her
Coventry.
husband is the person that I emailed with, so.
Chris DeBerna.
Oh, that last name, right. And then, the other thing is that I wrote over here what I needed for volunteers. It's not a ton so far of volunteer stationing things, but, once I get closer to one of those, like the one on the first week in October, I'll try to put 2 volunteers. The games only run from 9 to 2:30 on that day there, so.
Is there like a senior class assembly or something at the high school? Because I'm thinking a bunch of them will be 18, right? Or be in that 18 level just to try to talk to seniors. So we can ask, like,
So they actually have a movie night on the 28th. That I thought about, because I'm sure they would have a lot of the seniors would go to that. And I actually got some emails about it, so that's a possibility on the 28th of putting something out there, but the senior stuff, the homecoming, will definitely be at, and I don't think a lot of just the senior activities happen.
You should also consider the transfer station on Saturday morning.
Really?
Well, everyone goes to the transfer station on Saturday morning.
Well, that's good to know.
Right?
Not sure how many volunteers you'll get for that one, but.
Bring a truckload out to it.
Right?
Cranston doesn't have a transfer station.
Hey,
Just FYI, that's one of Portsmouth's
Yeah.
biggest initiatives,
What's that?
is to take this, a flyer and stand out at the dump.
Yeah, because-
They
Oh, you live there, so well, expect to get this
They don't
flyer
pick up
coming.
trash.
They don't pick up trash
They
there.
don't pick up
Yeah.
trash.
Everyone
We
has
have
to
to
go to the
take
dump.
it.
People campaign at the dump.
So things like the
Well-
supermarket become important, you know, at least where other people are other than students, because we have a lot of students.
What about
I say
places with
students,
the
that's
adults,
parents.
But again, this is only one of two efforts.
Right.
Right, because this effort is to get through council. And then I guess everyone needs to be comfortable with things dying down just a little. Not going dormant, but certainly, let's say you get through council in November, December and January, Thanksgiving, Christmas. You should think about at least touching base. But I imagine then you'll have to ramp up again.
January.
So it's
1.
sort of like two
Yeah, 2 ways.
waves.
Yes.
The holidays come, you really can't get
And-
much done during there, and then after the holidays.
So this year, I don't know if they'll have anything like this, but I know quite often they'll do like a band concert around Christmas time or something like that. So if you're doing anything like that, it's a place that a lot of parents go, that's more of a sit-down event.
All the church bazaars are starting up too. That might be a place to target.
Tree lighting at the rec center.
Yeah,
Taking notes on this?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm putting them on.
Dr. J's Savannah Cigar Shop, that's always fun.
Oh, the cigar bar, what a wonderful place to get people.
It's full, I'll give you that. It's full,
It's always,
and you never know who in that group is our target audience.
One last thing I want to say, and
Can't really
this is premature, because let's say you are successful in November, you'll want to make a decision whether you will try to start a nonprofit organization to support the Vote Yes campaign. Portsmouth found themselves without enough time or interest, by the way, to do that. So their whole effort in this November 2nd election is just based on information. So there is no Vote Yes campaign in Portsmouth.
And
See
we're
how successful
starting
they
that
are.
discussion. I think we've had a little bit of that discussion, but I need to have more. But you're right. I think by the time we get a vote from council, like before that, we need to get somebody secured to lead that effort.
Because that's a twofold thing. It's organizing the parent community group, and then it's getting funding to do what they need to do to communicate the marketing around.
And also, and I would expect that this team would still be managing that or some, I mean, there's some,
The
There needs to be
teams
some
will
kind of
continue,
connection.
but we're gonna have to think about the structure on how
Yeah.
everything gets, it'll get restructured a little. But yes, that's kind of the point of having the teams, was to roll that over and have, not have to rebuild the infrastructure. But I can't emphasize enough, with regards to the market, just keep in mind, because pitfalls of other towns, is that right now we're in information stage. So it's not marketing, it's everything we put out really can't say, you can say generally what the high points are of the project and things that are pro, but you can't come out and say, vote for this project, or you have to be just very careful. I'll just put it at that. We had this discussion. Sometimes you forget, but it can land you in some real hot water really quick.
As elected, as building committee members, we still can't.
I
thought it was the double dippers, like school committee, building committee, I thought. normal
So
people-
keep in mind that anything we use Phil for right now is funded through Feinstein Funds, which is school-related funding, which means that we cannot advocate with his materials.
Okay.
So this
material.
goes for you as well. Anything that has, get out there and vote, whatever, we've got to be, now, we can certainly borrow that material for second phase and retool it a little bit and move forward with a pro, but we just have to be very careful, that's all. So, we'll get there. But your point's well taken, I think, and Craig's talked to me about this as well, so I think we just have to kind of start putting the feeders out on who would lead up that effort. We had some ideas on maybe it would fit, so. All right, any other questions for Mrs. A? Comments? I just want to say thank you. is a group, you know, that's the first video of probably what will be several. I think you did a great job.
Yeah.
So,
Just one piece of
yeah, I think you did a great job. It's difficult to the point, like, you can't have it both ways. You can't not show the,
Right.
we've talked over and over again. We really need to show the bad pictures. And then when you see it, you're like, oh my God, don't show those.
Those pictures. I have
And the
some.
reality is,
Yeah,
that is
that's
what
right.
it
So
is.
It is what it is.
The
Those
book-
pictures will have
Good
something
job.
saying,
You guys
we're
have
closed to school.
some-
I just wanted to say, it doesn't take a lot to get me to tear up, but that made me tear up. So it was just so kind of like, wow. It was very emotional for me to see it, quite honestly.
People really
I
don't
thought that was a good-
understand how bad the schools are.
Well, sadly, the Washington Oak parents more than anyone.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Our school's
People tell their
nice.
kids to watch, you know, unless you go on those tours, you have no idea what these other kids are going into.
Exactly.
Right.
It's true.
And I think I said this at one of the last meetings, and I'll say it again, because I don't think we can overemphasize this. The teachers and the people that work in those buildings do an amazing job of kind of making the environment as vibrant as and clean as it can be. But you can't help but see it's falling apart. They're falling apart. So they have to be fixed. I don't understand how we as a community, and I know I'm talking with a community member, I don't know how we can fix it. I just don't know.
Keep
And
that.
It really was the pictures of the high school flood and the ceiling coming down that the high school kids actually, you know,
Yeah.
documented. That's really sold the last bond. You know,
That's why I
it
voted
was.
for the police station, because they went through and they showed all of those nasty
Exactly,
photos of what
exactly.
those officers were
jails look-
working in every day.
Not only that, but they're in a
think
much
we should be
safer
strategic
environment
about
now.
what we show. I mean,
Yeah.
that's all we had, is
Yeah.
what I had.
No, I know.
That's all we
No,
had.
no, it
I think
But
we
I
have
think it has to be
strategic.
dramatic.
But I think Joe's right.
has
There
to be
was,
dramatic.
there was one picture of the old Joe, but it was not, you couldn't see it very well.
You couldn't tell. it was
We should
Wasn't
get.
the good picture.
This is a-
Need a better picture.
We need some mushrooms
As
growing
kids,
up.
like, I swear to you, my son
Can you
came
show
home with
the
all those
buzz?
water droplets on his sneakers from school the other day, and I was like, what were you doing? Was you going doing something? No, there's water all on the bathroom floor, so when I walked through there, it was splashing up, so it's all, yeah, no, he said it was just, trust me, it was just water, he had a stroke. He can't handle if it was anything, but he's like, there's like water that he had to walk through, that swish as he enough, that was kicking, like, if we have these kids, and if you take some of these middle school kids and ask them what the worst part about the school building is, and put it on a video, let these kids be like, oh,
Let
it's
them
that classroom that has this, like, some of that should be interjected
Yeah.
in here,
Kids'
and then
voice
maybe with some
really
photos,
important.
letting these kids tell you what sucks about it.
So the last suggestion I'll have on this is we need additional photos. We have administrators in the building, spread the effort. You may have done this already, but just tell the principals, take their own photos of their work
And
area.
only if things we plan on fixing.
And only if that.
Things we plan on fixing with this bond.
Yeah. But
Well,
it- it's a-
that was one of the things that I was
I think that
uncomfortable
that
with
is-
when I was looking at pictures.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think there's a plan to fix this.
Well,
Like, 'cause there was something,
chances are if it's any one of those photos, it's listed as a priority one.
yeah, that's why.
And it's likely to get fixed. I mean, I don't think we would leave a lot of that in that condition. And a lot of the stuff that you showed, like, it looks really bad, but really, some of it, like replacing sinks and the striations on the wall, the paint falling off. I mean, all that stuff is planned into the
Manageable.
project, manageable. You know, it's actually the stuff behind the wall is actually the most expensive stuff, right, Phil?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And on the roof,
But we know that,
right,
because it's what we do. Some regular parent is not gonna know. that.
right. So I think, so the point
So
is,
the
well,
photos are impactful.
they are, and so they probably will be fixed because they're actually not a lot of cost, but they're impactful,
Cosmetic.
so. All right, we're past 8 o'clock. I'm gonna zip this up. I already talked about the presentation on the 27th. We're gonna work on it. Like I said, the presentation, unfortunately, just due to the reality of time constraints, everything else has to kind of be just a go effort, right? And kind of bottle this up, but I'll be talking to Harold, I'll be talking to Phil. We'll get a presentation together with a packet for the 27th. again, hopefully you can attend. Does anybody have any questions on the presentation itself? I mean, I kind of given the high level, so I won't beat the horse. Okay. I've already talked about item number 7, which is the meeting. We have no public here, so we'll move to schedule the next meeting. I will say that as you saw, I've delayed out some meetings because the teams are really taking the bulk share of the effort here. And I don't wanna have, it's more meetings, right? I don't have meetings just to have meetings. These meetings are really updates. So,
Well,
go
why
ahead.
don't you have one be like a week and a half after the 27th or something like that? And say to the council, we have another school building committee. If you could get me some questions by October 10th or whatever it is, I'm not looking really.
So
You know, that would be great. I could put it to the committee and we can have your questions answered. Because I would make clear to them, kind of like Ann said, you know, the presentation wasn't finished in time to get it to you early, but I knew it wouldn't be. And this is to create questions and create thoughts.
That's a good point. So so along those lines, October 6th would be a week and a half after or October 5th or 6th. I've been trying to do it on the Wednesday because finance team has been meeting on the Tuesday.
Mhm.
And I'll point to Harold, would you plan on having a follow-up meeting the week after?
The week after the 27th, we'll have a follow-up meeting
Okay.
to go over the comments from the financial side and then work through those.
Okay, so then I'll point to the 6th, which is a Wednesday. Does anybody have any major disruptions on the Wednesday?
Washington Oak parents, that's.
Oh, yeah, I have open house.
Yeah, I have.
So that's gonna be a problem. So how many other open houses do you have that week? Is that?
It'll be that week, Weston's the 5th, Washington Oak's the 6th, and the high school's the 7th.
Okay, so I think,
I don't think anyone can do that. High school.
but are you gonna be tied up in that?
In what?
The open houses?
No, they're all virtual.
Well, but it's all on the principals, right?
Yeah, they've been given the cheat sheet of.
So really, you'd be affected.
We both do Washington Oak, and Lita, you just said that Western is the 5th.
Yep, it's 6:30 to 8 on the 5th for West.
All right, so, and that's a school committee week as well, I believe.
Oh, yeah,
That's 2
and what do we
weeks out.
have? Do we have anything?
So
else?
why
I
don't-
have that as a school committee.
Is it not?
October
I have the
12th.
14th as a school.
Yeah, I don't have the
Okay,
7th.
all right, maybe because I'm thinking tomorrow's a school committee meeting, so I'm thinking 2 weeks out.
No,
but
it's the
maybe
14th and the 28th.
Okay, all right. So why don't we look at the 7th? Thursday?
I'm good with the 7th.
I'm busy
Yeah.
every night of my life, so I'll go with the
I
7th.
know, all right. So let's, why don't we look at the 7th? So I'll move, I'll request a motion for scheduling next meeting for October 7th at 6 o'clock.
I'll second.
Who's the second?
I think it's Kathy. Oh, Kathy said,
I said so moved. I
So
don't know. I
Kathy's the
think you
one,
said
is that,
Alita's the second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sounds good.
and Alita?
Yes,
All
sir.
right, all those in favor, voice vote, and
Yep.
aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, motion passes. And I'll request a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Alita, thank you.
I'll second it. Everyone second.
Everybody second. Oh,
All right, I'm voting.
We'll call it Kim.
Who's the first?
Oh, Alita was first, I was second.
All those in favor? Voice vote,
Aye.
hand vote. Any opposed? Thank you very much, everybody.